The ROG Ally was ASUS's answer to the Steam Deck, but it's gotten a really bad rep since its launch for being way worse in one specific department. Can you guess what it is? It's weird because on paper, at least the higher performance Z1 Extreme version of the Ally is really good. A 1080p screen, 16 gigs of RAM, better processor than the competition, 512 gigs of storage, RGB, a cool new color scheme, and like 2 hours tops of battery life? That sucks. I sure hope there's a way to fix that. Asus recently announced their new Ally X with literally double the battery capacity of the original, but it costs 800 big ones brand new. That's US dollars for those not familiar with my vernacular. The regular Z1 Extreme version of the Ally, which is the only one as far as I'm concerned, right now costs 650 bucks. So if you want a better battery capacity and more RAM and storage and support for full-size 2280 NVMe SSD, you could always spend an extra $150. Cool, great, Rich McGee over here, whatever. But for anyone who already has one of the OG Allies or is looking to exercise some level of thriftiness and free will, iFixit put out this cool guide on how to mod your console with an 88 watt-hour Asus laptop battery in place of the disgusting 40 watt-hour one that comes stock in the Ally. And it'll only cost you like 50 bucks. Well, that and you need to get your own 3D printer. And since I spent all my money on mustache wax and framed pictures of the green M&M, I gave the newfangled battery mod a go. It also helps that I have a boss that lets me use this 3D printer. Okay, I have a boss that doesn't know I use this 3D printer, but please don't tell on me, please. But before I actually got down and dirty, I had to count my chickens, you know? I gotta make sure I'm not being sold a lie or anything. So I did a couple benchmarks that I redid after the old switcheroo to see how much more fun I can get up to now that I'm untethered from those pesky little wall holes. The Ally has a few different performance modes, so I checked out how fast each one drained while hovering and staring at the sky on a broom in Hogwarts Legacy. Why that game of all the games? You know, I can't remember, but I was probably just feeling especially magical that day. So freaking deal with it! I'm sorry, I didn't mean to raise my voice at you. Please don't click away. Running Harry Potter and the Legacy of Hogwarts, or whatever it's called, on the low quality preset while using FSR2 Ultra Performance mode at 1080p on the Z1 Extreme Ally's silent mode, the 10 watt mode, depleted the entire battery in around 2 hours and 20 minutes. That, and I think it ran at like 15 frames per second the entire time. Performance mode, or 15 watt mode, was a little more playable, but lasted nearly half that time, coming in at an hour and 20 minutes before it kicked off. Turbo mode, which is the Ally's 25 watt mode, lasted a little over 50 minutes. That's kind of crazy, but it's also 1080p, so it's asking a bit much here, you know? Now to prep for the surgery, I needed all my little tools, like a heat gun. You can substitute a hairdryer if you're following along at home, appropriately sized drill bits, electronics glue, tweezers, spudgers, whatever these little guitar pick things are called, and I downloaded and printed the replacement back panel iFixit tells you to use for this. Oh yeah, the new battery doesn't just hold more power, it's also hilariously big and heavy compared to the original one. You're not even really making it fit into the Ally as much as you're just securing it to the outside. It's equal parts clever and dumb. But in the end, you'll have a perfect little kickstand on your thing at all times. Tell me you think it's cool right now! Alright, I followed iFixit's specific instructions on their website for the battery mod, and let me be clear, this is not just an unplug one battery and plug in another type situation. I consider myself a person who can navigate the innards of his fair share of electronics, but I still got a little nervous poking around in there. That's what she said. So if you do decide to do this yourself, definitely use their instructions and not just this video. Still watch though, don't leave, but that'll be more helpful. Firstly, I printed this modded backplate while Brett wasn't looking and made sure all the pilot holes were properly drilled out where the screws would need to connect to the standoffs once the project's finished. Simple enough, but it immediately gets a little sketchier. See, the replacement battery isn't technically meant for the Ally at all. It's really just an Asus laptop battery that could technically work on the console if it had a different connector attached to it. Do you see where I'm going with this? Yeah, we now have to steal the connector from the original battery and attach it to the new one. The next step is to crack the Ally open, carefully undo the connection from the battery to the motherboard, take the connector out of the original battery, heat it up with your little gunny gun, just enough to where the glue starts to melt, but not so much that the plastic on the connector deforms. And you know what they say about deformed plastic? Once it's not too hot and not too cold, but just right, the glue can be separated from the connector, and if you're nice and gentle, you can slowly pull the wires out one at a time. I wasn't gentle though, and ended up breaking part of one of the copper pieces in the plastic connector, and it took like half an hour to get it out after that. But if you do it right, once the glue's pulled away, you can lift up these little plastic tabs and slide the wires out. You wind up with this little naked piece of plastic, and that's literally all we wanted. You can throw away all these dumb wire things now. they are worthless. And I'm not done yet, because then I did the whole process again, but this time all the wires have one end stuck into this big fat battery, which means not only do you have to make sure to not shoot your hairdryer directly at the battery when heating up the glue, but you also got to keep certain wires separated from one another unless you hate having a working console, because the tiniest mistake here could cost the integrity of the battery. Or at least that's what iFixit says. The guide says to pull all the black wires first, then the green and blue, and then the red, and to not let the red ones touch the other colors. And I did as I was told, because I am a good little boy. Then you gotta slide all the exposed copper portions of those freshly shucked wires into the Nike connector we harvested earlier, and glue them down so they ain't going nowhere. Then, after transplanting over the triggers and those little black key things on the back that nobody uses, it was finally time to plug in the new battery. This step is a little finicky, but I promise it's possible, and after that, everything just clicks into place. If there's any problems here, iFixit recommends that you make sure you covered the light sensor on the back of the motherboard, since the console won't boot unless that thing's completely blacked out for some reason. And you gotta double check your wiring. I had to do both of those things before it actually turned on. But once everything's troubleshot, once everything passes the vibe check, the Ally needs to be plugged in with the proper USB-C charging cable before it'll recognize the new battery. But after all that, I finally had a new and improved 88 watt-hour battery installed, and it works great. I also made sure to follow iFixit's battery calibration guide before testing it to make sure this bad boy lasts as long as possible. Apparently, you're supposed to always do this when you swap out your laptop battery. They say to leave the device with the new battery on charge until it's at 100%, and then leave it there for another 2 hours charging. At that point, you let it drain back down to 0, wait at least 5 hours, and then plug it back in, charge it back up to full capacity, which I did because I'm so good at stuff. And since this guy's all set up and I didn't break anything, I think, I can get some nice use out of today's sponsor, Lenovo.
Today's video is sponsored by Lenovo and their Legion lineup of monitors. Specifically, we've been using the Y27QF-30, which is a 27-inch 1440p IPS gaming monitor. This thing has an incredibly fast response time of half a millisecond, comes in at 125% of the sRGB and 95% of the DCI-P3 color space, supports 10-bit color, has HDR support, as well as AMD FreeSync and Adaptasync. But also, it has an incredibly high refresh rate of not just 240 Hz, but it actually goes up to 250 Hz, allowing you to get incredibly high refresh rate that you typically don't see on other 1440p panels, allowing you to play and experience your esports games at high FPS, or even enjoying the latest hot game on Steam at blisteringly fast speeds. With a robust stand as well as USB support for your peripherals, the Lenovo Legion lineup of monitors is something you should definitely check out, as well as specifically the Y27QF-30. It's honestly in that perfect range for a lot of high-end PC gamers. 1440p, 250 Hz, you're going to be able to get high pixel density with that resolution of 1440p, as well as that high refresh rate. A big thank you to Lenovo for sponsoring today's video. You can check them out down below in the video description.
Also, if you don't want to putz around with all this, maybe just use a Legion Go. Lenovo makes those too. But getting back into the Hogwarts town, Legotown with the new upgraded Ally on the 15 watt performance mode gave us a total of around 3 hours and 15 minutes of playtime. Oh yeah. That's nearly a full 2 hours longer than the hour and 20 minutes we got before the modifications. The 25 watt turbo mode drained the old girl in about 2 hours, giving us an extra hour and 10 minutes-ish on top of the original 50-ish minutes. And let me level with you guys. I just didn't have time to benchmark the 10 watt silent mode because it takes so freaking long. Have you ever just sat there and watched a computer slowly die for no reason? It's super boring. Regardless, I did a few super high level calculations, and according to that, it would have lasted a long time. I'm just kidding. It should have been somewhere in the neighborhood of like 5 hours, which is crazy when compared to the initial 2 hours and 20 minutes that the 10 watt mode gave us. All right though, listen. While the battery mod is more than double the original 40 watt hour battery life the Ally ships with, and still 8 watt hours more than the Ally X, I still don't know if I'd ever recommend anyone who isn't super comfortable with tinkering around with their expensive stuff to try this. The thing is, if you don't already have all the tools and resources at your disposal, you're gonna be looking at a pretty decent investment since you'll have to get a 3D printer. Unless you have a boss that has one and doesn't pay attention to his filament stock levels. Z1 Extreme Allies seem to be averaging around like $300 to $400 US for resale on eBay, and personally, I think the Ally X is a much better upgrade than the iFixit battery mod. Especially after holding one and getting to play on it at Computex this year, I'd much rather sell my old console at a loss and split the difference for the upgrade, if I'm not confident in my ability to mod like this. The Ally X has better battery and specs, but it also has better button placement and more meat in the back to hold on to, if you know what I mean. Do you? But seriously, I think that stuff's actually really important when it comes to handhelds. Say what you will about the PlayStation Portal, but that thing is an absolute dream to hold, if nothing else, purely because it's just a sawed-in-half PS5 controller. All that being said, it's still incredibly cool that we live in a world where modding your stuff like this is possible. iFixit didn't have to teach us how to do this, but here we are, fully capable of tempting fate with a little glue and a hairdryer, and now I have this monstrosity of a handheld, but with a way bigger battery. Thanks for watching, and tell your dad I said hi. Follow me on Twitch.